Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. This is super exciting to be back in Bangkok. I've been here for the 2022 edition, and it's super cool to be. Should I take it? Okay. Today I want to talk about some of the open source projects I've been working on over the last year. It's Herb and ReActionView. It's a I want to call it a new foundation for the view layer in Rails, and technically even all other Ruby web frameworks. And if you haven't met, I'm Marco. I'm a full stack developer. I like to do everything from the database down to the sea level now, I guess, with these tools. And I have been doing a lot of open source. I love open source. I love Ruby. And I think that Ruby still is really elegant. It's really expressive, and it's a joy to write. And because of that, I think it's important for us to keep Ruby as attractive as possible and also as productive as possible so we can keep doing Ruby in our day-to-day work. And that's why I'm excited that I can share with you today what I have been working on. I have been working a lot on Hotwire stuff. I have been on the core team of Stimulus Reflex and Cape already. If you aren't familiar with those tools, they are kind of the predecessor of Hotwire. And thanks through that, I have been also maintaining Stimulus on and off over the last few years. Recently, I got more involved with dev tooling and kind of improving dev tooling for my own needs, but then also being able to share it with the community. And one of the first things that I've been working on was the Stimulus LSP that I released 3 years ago, which is meant to help you write better Stimulus code, or write Stimulus code and catch some of the errors that you might be writing while writing the code. I also kind of dabbled with a Turbo LSP. This is not really fully fledged yet, and this is kind of the thing where I have been working on this Herb ecosystem, which is this idea of kind of improving the HTML and ERB, that's the name, situation in our day-to-day web development framework work. And on top of that, I've been working on ReActionView, which is meant to integrate all of that into Rails and make Rails a bit better in terms of ergonomics. Now, if you kind of look at recent JavaScript trends and the front-end trends, it's pretty much all of it is TypeScript, all of it is like React and JavaScript. And we are Ruby engineers. We don't necessarily want to write a lot of those, if at all. But one thing that they really nailed and something that can get inspired from is their dev tools. Their developer tooling is really good, it's really awesome, and it's something that we can kind of look at and borrow these concepts and bring them back into Ruby. The best example, I think, here is the Vue kind of suite of tools. They pretty much have the full stack, the full kind of range of tools, and provides really powerful tools for writing Vue code, but also now testing and bundling and also writing documentation. And recently, they also have this Void Zero initiative that writes a lot of more advanced developer tooling, including linters and formatters, which are super performant and super fast. And even though Vue is not the most popular one, they kind of shape and kind of influence the whole React or even JavaScript ecosystem and improve all the tools through their work. But we love Ruby, and that's why we want to kind of see how we can adapt this for Ruby. I have been teaching Hotwire and also Rails at bootcamps, and have been mentoring some early career engineers and helping businesses with adopting Hotwire in their own apps. And the most common kind of source of frustration was lack of tooling, lack of feedback, but also a lot of documentation needs. And it's also not just about the tooling itself. It's also about the choices and the decisions you have to make to be able to write a Rails app today, or frontend in Rails today. Rails famously is omakase, which means that it should limit the decisions you have to make to get started. And I think that's why Rails is awesome, and that's kind of why they provide awesome defaults so you can get started quickly and have all the same structure set up in all the apps. And that's also what makes Rails so productive, I feel like, because you can assume these patterns, these workflows, and just these setups that are always the same. But on the other hand, the industry doesn't stand still, and the expectation of modern web applications have shifted drastically over the last few years. And also the web platform itself improved a lot over the last decade. in HTML and JavaScript, you got a bunch of new features which are advancing the web platform as a whole, including like the web components, import maps, PWAs, and so much more. In CSS, we also got a lot of new functions and layers and properties and CSS nesting that are kind of pushing what CSS is able to do. There's a lot more things that are coming out pretty much every 1 month about improving CSS. There are also a lot of more new web APIs which are improving the web platform. I think most known one here might be the View Transitions API, which was a Turbo added support for, but also speculation rules, which adds like offline support. And the most interesting one I feel like is the Invoke Commands API, which might be able to replace some of the stimulus stuff we have been writing natively by using invokers, which are supported by the browser. But there are more issues in writing views today, and I listed some of them here. I think the most interesting one is also the reusability and the organization of view codes, how you kind of define boundaries, how you organize view codes, but also how you test views and how you kind of have tooling for writing your views. The other thing is, if you have been doing Rails and front-end work, there have been a lot of tools. And if you don't know where to start, this is kind of overwhelming and it's kind of hard to get around. There also have been a lot of different tools to kind of help with that over the years. And some of them are still around, some of them are kind of abandoned. But I've been wondering how we could approach this problem with a modern approach and different angle, with the goal of keeping everything kind of backwards compatible as much as possible, where it makes sense, but make it familiar, like as ReActionView is, and it has been so consistent over the last 2 decades as Rails exists, and that's kind of also a good thing, because even in the day age of AI, this hasn't changed, and this is like all in the training data, and this is a good thing. So if you kind of can embrace that, that's really good for these LLMs. So we can write powerful applications and ambitious applications using full stack Ruby, but there is some issues with that. But today, I want to kind of talk about this and how this is improving and evolving. So I want to talk about how Herb came to be, how Herb can help you in your day, even from tomorrow on, and kind of what's next for it. To kind of talk about how Herb started, initially, back a few years ago, I was kind of frustrated with how Stimulus works. And if you're not familiar with Stimulus, you have like controllers in your app JavaScript controllers folder. You kind of have a name for them. And this name of the file itself kind of is implicitly also the identifier for this controller. And this controller in this case just has a simple connects and a console log in it. And then in your HTML, you can reference this and have this controller name in the controller attribute. Now, if you open your browser, you kind of look at the console, you wouldn't see anything in this case, even though we clearly have a console log here in this connect method. But the thing is that for Stimulus controllers, you have to use dashes instead of underscores. So this underscore here should be a dash, but there's no like way that the framework told you it's wrong, or that the browser told you it's wrong, or that the tools told you it's wrong. So you have no feedback and no kind of don't know where it's going wrong. And these mistakes happen so easily, and that's kind of what I wanted to tackle. So at Rails World a few years ago, I kind of shipped this LSP and these improvements, kind of had this initiative started to get this all going. Stimulus LSP is already available for the download if you haven't checked it out. It works across all major editors that have a LSP, the LSP protocol supported. And how it helps you is it kind of helps you with autocomplete of all the possible attribute values. It will tell you if something is wrong about these names, so it will tell you if a did you mean suggestion. But the problem here is that it was HTML only. So there was no ERB support in that sense. If you have this code in your ERB file, it would work. But oftentimes in Rails apps, you have these helpers that aren't supported in current day. So there was a missing abstraction and a missing support for these HTML ERB and Rails-specific helpers that we weren't able to support. And especially for the Turbo LSP, this is quite important because Turbo relies on a lot of Ruby helpers to make this work. The other motivation was we had no support for ERB in the Ruby LSP, which is the popular LSP for Ruby, for writing Ruby. And at RubyConf a few years ago, we got together to kind of see how we can make this work and enable it also that we have ERB support in RubyLSP. But we quickly realized that there is no good way of how we can make this work with the current tools available. So we had kind of these three pillars of what we want to do and how we want to what we need, these kind of use cases. And a few failed attempts later of still trying to hack this together, make it work, I decided that I want to tackle the bigger picture. And that meant that I wanted to write a HTML ERB parser that understands how your view files are written and organized. More specifically, this is a HTML-aware ERB parser, which means that it understands the HTML structure next to your ERB tags. And we are adding structural awareness to these templates, and with that, we can do more advanced tools. In February last year, I got the chance to I got accepted for speaking at RubyCaigi last year, and I proposed a talk for empowering developers with HTML-aware tooling, but I only had like a basic concept and idea of what this could look like. It wasn't done yet, so I had pretty much 2.5 months to figure this out so I can kind of make it work for the talk. And it's really kind of impressive how you can, if you can focus on it and dedicate your time, how this can work out. So the herb parser actually released in April of 2025 as part of the talk. And we were able to ship the parser, we were able to ship bindings for the WebAssembly and for the Node.js and for all the other popular languages, because the parser itself was written in C. Then the herb ecosystem itself, we wanted to have the parser, but also have a formatter and linter so you can have this in HTML ERB files. And that's what I shipped at RailsConf 2025 last year, where I also kind of showed the potential of how the Rails view layer could look like if we invested more time in it. So there we got the herb linter, we got a herb formatter and the herb language server. And while building these out, there were a lot more tools that were kind of added to the ecosystem and kind of started growing. Most of the libraries at the bottom are supporting libraries to kind of make these other three work, but it's still useful to have them available. And this is already a really rich ecosystem. So I want to tell you how you can use herb today in your day-to-day work. The design goal here is that this should be a no setup thing, so you don't have to install everything or anything, or don't have to configure anything to make it work. So where do you start? Ideally, you install the herb language server as part of your editor. It's available in VS Code. There's like a plugin you can install from the VS Code store. If you're using Z, it's already built in by default. So if you have Z installed, it's already built in. And if you have NeoVim, you can also enable it through the new-ish Vim LSP enable, and it will enable it automatically. And what it will give you is it will give you diagnostics for HTML errors when you have missing closing tags, if you have missing or invalid syntax and missing characters. It also understands Ruby, so you can see that this statement is missing an N, so it will tell you that something is not right with the statement. And the thing is that this is all in your editor, so as you type, it's immediate feedback as you are writing it out. So this is super helpful for just working on view code and having immediate feedback. Then the herb linter, the idea here was that we wanted to have something similar to the Ruby style guides, but for how you write good views. We didn't have anything for that in the Ruby ecosystem, I feel like. So I started this to help kind of guide people towards best practices of how you write views. And to help people avoid common mistakes, to also enforce consistent style, but also to kind of enable backend engineers to get more familiar with tools, with ideas like accessibility, which is a super complex topic, but if the linter can kind of teach you as you're writing out this code that something is not right here, it is able to tell you right in your file. So you can see here, the linter is already built in, so if you install the plugin, it also have the linter enabled, so you have all these kind of diagnostics here. You can also disable them if you don't like them, but it's kind of low config, no setup, just works. Because we understand Ruby, we can also give you more advanced diagnostics where you see the control flow. In this case, you might have a duplicate ID, and that's why it's able to flag this as like a duplicate ID, which is not valid HTML if you would have duplicate IDs. But there's also, like if you have linter rules, you also want to understand why they are that way. So there's a way you can click on these rule names. It will bring you to the documentation. It will tell you why this rule exists, why it's useful. It will have examples as you might know them from RubyConf, but also super helpful. It will also tell you the diagnostics in the documentation of why this is wrong and where it's wrong, and it will give you this feedback. Right now we have around 50 linter rules. There are more ideas for around 60 more. So if you have any ideas of what we can kind of build in and stuff you have seen in your applications, please open an issue. Then finally, the herb formatter. The idea here was that we want to build a auto formatter, so you can pretty much give it any HTML ERB, and you kind of save your file or run the CLI, and then it will just kind of output formatted HTML ERB as you would expect it from, or might know it from other tools, like Prettier. And because this is all integrated also with the language server, you can just save your file, it will just kind of format these things, and it's super snappy and super fast. The other good thing is, because we also have CLIs, you can also run the CLI, and it will give you these rich diagnostics in the CLI to tell you where the lint offense is and at which location, which file, and so on. So you can just run these npx command without installing anything, even if you just have to have npx and install, run them, and it will just lint the files for you. If you want to run them in CI, you can just add this configuration, and it will just check the ERB files for you. And then finally, we had a big release last year, the herb 08, and we also added support for Tailwind and the way of how Tailwind has a specific class order and how they recommend of sorting them. So if you kind of have this plugin enabled and you have CSS classes, you save the file, it will sort them in a predictable and consistent way. Recently, we also shipped support for a herb linter fix, so you can have all these linter commands, offenses, and if you run the CLI with the fix, it will kind of automatically fix them for you. And then in the language server, if you have fix on save enabled in the editor, if you kind of save this file, it will automatically apply these offenses and kind of fix them. But if you don't have the format enabled, it will still work. So you can still just fix the linter offenses without actually formatting anything else in the file, which is super helpful. There is a herb config file if you still want to kind of opt out of things. It's one config file for all the tools in the ecosystem. You can write custom linter rules if you want for something specific in your company, or you can also disable linter offenses in line with the comment. That was kind of the whole herb release last year, and it had a lot of awesome features that I feel like made this actually now usable in day-to-day use, which is something really cool that we can see in day-to-day use, yeah. If you want to learn more about all the details, there's a blog post that you can read on the herbtools.dev website. But yeah, so far this has all been about tooling, but working on these tools made me realize that we have a lot more introspection now in what these files are and what they are doing. And if you have all this knowledge, we can do more advanced things, and which means we can also try to render HTML ERB using a custom engine that we can write. This was the kind of topic of my Rails World talk last year, where we shipped this ReActionView and also this herb engine concept. So herb engine is a HTML-aware ERB rendering engine. And the idea here is that it's eRuby engine compatible. So eRuby engine is the default ERB engine that Rails uses today if you are using ERB. And the idea is that we are using herb to parse your files and then also process these templates so you can actually render them out. But why? Because we are using the herb parser, we can also ensure that we have valid HTML syntax, and it will only render HTML that's actually valid because of it. And one of the nice things about this now is, or one of the most annoying things in Rails today is that if you have syntax errors in your files, it might give you a screen like this. And obviously you can see there's a missing closing tag here. But it's just kind of hard to spot where this error might be in your templates. But since we actually know already, because of the parser, where this error is, because we are already showing this to you in your editor, we can also bring this exact feature to the browser. So if you have a syntax error it will show you this exactly now in the browser with this rich diagnostics and rich like error screen where something is missing or something is wrong. And since we control the rendering now, so we are taking your templates, we are rendering out these templates, we can also, and we understand HTML, we can do more things. And the nice thing that I was thinking about is that we can inject more HTML attributes because we know where we have tags, where we have elements, so we can add more stuff to it while we are rendering them. So one idea was that we are adding a custom data attribute on our elements, which in this case has a file name for which of the view itself. And with a little bit of CSS, with like an outline and like an offset and some colors, we are able to render the outlines of our views in the browser when you open them. So you can see where views start and where partials start and where they stop. So if we add another attribute here for the type of view, we have like views, we have partials, we have components. We can give them different colors. So in this case, you can see here, we have like orange or yellow for components. We have green for partials and also the blue for views, which is super helpful if you're like browsing the app and you want to know where this is coming from. And sometimes it's hard to find these spots in your views folder. So what we can do now is we can also say, let's add a relative path attribute so that when you hover over these labels, it will show you the full path inside of your application. And then one final thing we can do is we can say, let's also add the full path on your system for this file, so that when you actually click on these labels, that it will open your editor with the file where they are defined. So it's super easy to kind of go from rendered output back to the files. Then, since we already know and understand ERB and how these elements are being processed, we can also enable this other toggle we have here. I will zoom in on that, where we can see where ERB is used to render out some of these dynamic values. So all these purple outlines is where ERB is used. And if you enable this other option for revealing this output tag on hover, you can see what was used to render this out in the browser, which is super kind of helpful to, again, debug where stuff is coming from and where stuff is happening. And because we have all this introspection, we can also do the same with jump to source to say, if you click on this label, on this outline, it will jump right to your file, but also to the right column and right line in your editor, which is super useful. So this gives us really valuable feedback for day-to-day use. And the nice thing now is that since we are using the same parser in our editor for powering our tools, and we use the same parser that's rendering and compiling our view files, there's no mismatch anymore between the actual errors. So the tooling becomes a lot more accurate and in this case also instant because it's just like running in your editor natively. So what we kind of did here is we took the previous eRuby engine, which you could kind of think of a string template engine. eRuby or ERB itself is just interpolating Ruby values into strings and turned it into a HTML templating engine. So our engine is now aware of these HTML surroundings and can enhance them and add additional attributes in development. In production, this is just all ignored and skipped, and it will not ship this additional these additional attributes. So this was kind of the full summary of the Rails world talk, where we have the Herb engine, the dev tools, and all these advanced improvements for writing day-to-day ERB code. So now we kind of have the tooling somewhat figured out, and the rendering also figured out. So we want to talk about what we can do next. ActionView itself is a really good foundation that we can build on, and it's stable. It's been there for ages. So we want to try to see if we can reimagine some of the parts in how it works. Maybe try to re-engineer some of the parts to make it more efficient or more productive. But also maybe try to make it react in a way that we are knowing from React or other front-end systems today. And that's this initiative of ReActionView, where we are trying to explore what could be possible in the view layer if we kind of keep going from here on out. So we have this vision with some adoption levels, we kind of ship the first two now with the better error messages and the better in the engine, and remaining are these other levels now. So what you can do now with ReActionView today is it will take Herb engine and you can integrate this into your Rails apps. What you have to do for this is you add this ReActionView gem to your gem file. You can run the generator to generate the initializer, and it will give you this kind of initializer here. By default, it's using the debug mode in development. You can kind of configure that if you want to have this also in production. I'm not sure I recommend that, but you can do that. But the other thing is that you want to intercept ERB files. So by default, it's using eRuby today, but you can kind of force ReActionView to use Herb engine for all your ERB views. And if you do that, you get this neat development menu in your local browser that you can click on, and then you can kind of configure all of these features I showed you earlier. One of the other nice things is that we try to add more inspired things from the Rails logs. So you can see here that we try to render how long it took to render this part of the page when you are rendering out this view. So this is kind of inspired by this log that you have in your Rails server log. But obviously here you cannot see that this link partial was rendered, I don't know how many times, but you cannot see where this is actually being used on the page. So for debugging reasons, if you are looking for performance stuff, it's helpful to see this visually in the browser where stuff is actually slow. We also have been experimenting with also rendering the allocations and like how many SQL queries were used inside this block. So you can also try to see where SQL is being used, which is not what you want to do in your view code usually. So yeah, the last few levels are, I want to talk about them really quickly and go over them. So we have more potential in ReActionView to optimize things. A few things are today, like the slow parts, is the partial lookup. So when you say render partial in your views, this lookup to look for the file is quite slow. But since we now have this introspection, we can kind of try to inline these lookups before and can make this stuff much faster. We can also try to optimize away some of these ReActionView tag helpers. So if you say content tag diff or tag.diff, then you can turn them into static HTML already on compile time, so it's going to be much faster. And the last one might be to say, let's try to see if we can make it faster by improving or minifying white space that's not needed anymore, or similar things. Or if stuff is not actually being used because you have conditions in your view, but like that are never going to be true, we can kind of optimize that out as well, or strip comments and stuff like that. The level 4 would be to try to see if you can make stuff reactive in the sense similar to how, if you're familiar with it, Phoenix Live does this in Phoenix, in Elixir, or how Stimulus Reflex, which is a kind of a port of Live View in Rails, have been doing this in the past. Level 5 is try to see if we can maybe do client-side templates. So we say maybe there's a limited set of ERB that we allow, and we can then transpile this in a way that we can run this in the browser, in the client, that we can do this client-side. So it's kind of like ERB client components, similar to how you can think of them like web components or React components in a way. Not sure how this looks like exactly, but it's something interesting to explore that we have the possibilities now. And the final step, which is sort of the hardest one, I think, is try to integrate external components directly into your ERB engine. The thing is that when you are writing apps today, and they have been using ERB traditionally, and you want to have a more advanced front end, you want to use React, you might have to just rebuild this whole thing in React, and this is just radical to say, let's replace everything in one go, in the one PR, and that's it. So you want to have it be able to use React next to your traditional ERB views, and only do it on certain pages. And I'm thinking this could be looking like import maps Rails today, where you are pinning some of the dependencies to files, that you can say, I want to register these components from packages that you might know from, like, in this case, Chatcn, or from a local folder in your view, in your app, that you can import them. And if you have them in your context, you can then use these components right next to your ERB as you kind of expect. And if you kind of have that kind of setup, I feel like you have a lot more power and a lot more flexibility in adopting other tools and frameworks inside a Rails app, which has been missing as well. And since the engine knows about these components, what to kind of render clients on the backend side, it can provide the right arguments, the right props, and knows how to mount and hydrate them. This is kind of similar to inertia in a way. The thing with inertia is that you have to pretty much go in all on React for the front ends. So you cannot just say, I want to use this on certain pages, or you can use it only on certain pages, but it has to be pretty much all or nothing, right? So it's, again, quite radical. But it's kind of trying to imitate that by just doing this right in the ERB engine itself. So if you want to kind of learn more about this whole in-depth vision for how the Rails stack could look like, I recommend you to check out the RailsConf talk from last year. So if you feel like building ambitious apps is important to you, I am looking for companies that want to kind of try run this and kind of try to shape how this could look like. So if you have this kind of potential needs, please reach out and we can see how we can kind of bring this to life in ReActionView. Yeah. So to conclude, the thing is that with the Ruby Prism parser, the Ruby 3.4 shipped a new parser for Ruby itself. And it had a big impact on how Ruby internals itself, but also how tooling improved. So RubyConf today, RubyLSP, and many other tools are already using Prism as their way of parsing. And I feel like that Herb could have a similar effect of enabling more advanced tools in the HTML templating and rendering and tooling ecosystem. Initially, this started as a parser, and now it's already kind of a valuable set of tools in an ecosystem that you can use today. But this unlocks a whole set of new tools that we can build now. And I believe that this kind of shows already what we could go and could do if we kind of keep pushing that down that path. So yeah, we can push more boundaries and build more awesome tools because Ruby itself has had incredible tooling from the beginning. And now I feel like it's time to bring this kind of care back to the view layer so we can build more ambitious Rails apps. And with Herb and ReActionView, I feel like we have a path forward now to make this work. Herb Engine itself is also really interesting because I think it's important that this is independent from Rails and other frameworks, so you can use this pretty much anywhere. So having this as an independent engine is going to be really powerful to also enable other frameworks like Hanami or Rack or other tools to use this and have this same experience across all these frameworks. And as I mentioned a few times now, I love Ruby, and that's why I'm doing all of this work. It's quite interesting because at the beginning of last year, I had no idea that I would be trying to build this out and build this whole ecosystem of tools. And definitely wasn't on my bingo card that I'm writing this whole ecosystem in pretty much a year. And the other nice thing is that since it's written in C, and since I haven't really used C before this project, it was also super nice to learn new tools and new languages. And I think that on-demand learning is really powerful if you know how to use it. So projects like these help me and probably also help you to kind of grow and learn new skills and new languages. And as I mentioned, I haven't written any C before, and I haven't really written any Ruby extensions for C Ruby extensions. And I also didn't have an excuse before to kind of mess and deal with WebAssembly. But this project now allowed me to kind of explore all these areas and kind of learn more things. If you look at Herb, the repo today, it's a mix of languages, which is not something typical that you see. And it also kind of allows me to kind of dabble with Rust for the first time. So we have bindings for Rust. We also have bindings for Java, so we can kind of enable maybe even JRuby support and stuff like that. So it's really kind of interesting to kind of be able to learn and dig deep into a project like that. And I think it goes to show that with a bit of dedication, a bit of time, what that could yield and how that could improve the Ruby community at large. And as I already mentioned this morning, if you just keep building and if you kind of try to bring this back to the community, it can really influence a whole ecosystem of tools and influence the trajectory of a templating language and also improve the dev tools around it. I initially built this for myself to kind of, because I was kind of wanting to have these tools because I saw them in other ecosystems. But it's been really awesome to see the whole feedback and adoption from people using it for the first time and being surprised what we can do now. And this is just awesome to see how people realize that we can do this now in Rails today. So yeah, I hope I have given some good overview of Herb and its potential. And if you have any ERB views and any views, Rails apps that you are using ERB with today, please try it out. Please report issues if you find any. There's never a bad issue. So if you think something is not right and it's not behaving the way you expect it to, there's a very good chance it's actually not right in the implementation. So feedback is really valuable to be able to have companies adopt this and kind of have this more, pretty much be a drop-in replacement for the other engines that are out there. And finally, I want to give a big thanks to all the contributors that have been contributing to the Herb project itself. And I want to give a big thanks to all my sponsors on GitHub, which have been helping me and supporting me throughout this journey. So if you can, please give it a star on GitHub if you haven't already, and check out the documentation on herb-tools.dev. I believe that we have a bright future for the Rails frontend story and the Ruby frontend story. And if you kind of keep building your apps in Ruby and keep building your open source in Ruby, it really helps to kind of advance the ecosystem. And with a bit of dedication, a bit of time, you can also build awesome things. Be the change you want to see in the world. Thank you.